Hi, third graders. It's time for our social studies lesson. We're going to be talking about the United States taking over California. And it wasn't just California at that time, but that was their main priority. But we also could include New Mexico and Arizona, and you'll find out later on, maybe a few other states. So let's take a listen and follow along as we read. The United States takes California. In the mid-1840s, California wasn't part of the United States. It was part of Mexico, which had been established as a republic in 1821 when people living in Mexico overthrew Spanish rule. So before Mexico actually owned California, or the area of California, it was actually owned by Spain. So, interesting information. While under Spanish rule, California was far away from the Spanish colonial leaders in central Mexico. This made it hard to supply California with the goods it needed to attract new settlers. Once Mexico declared its freedom from Spain, California's ports were open to other countries for trade, and the region flourished, which meant it grew. More people came in, more people built boom towns, and that was the start of California. By the 1840s, people from the eastern United States had begun to travel west along transcontinental trails to start new lives on the frontier. These pioneers packed up whatever belongings they could fit into their wagons, leaving the lives they knew behind. A small number made it as far as California. Now you'll notice that there are two words highlighted in our reading passage, transcontinental, and what transcontinental means is they are paths, or if you think about the railroad, it stretched from one end of the country, which was the East Coast, all the way to the end of the United States to the West Coast, which would have been California. So we're talking about going from coast to coast, and basically we're going to talk about that more in detail as we move on. Now, one of the most popular trails that we talk about, and you'll notice there's a picture on the side. Underneath that picture is a caption, and that caption reads, "The Oregon Trail was perhaps the most important transcontinental route established by the pioneers in the years leading up to the gold rush. It was also the longest trail, covering about 2,000 miles. So again, transcontinental means it was able to go from coast to coast, or it stretched across the continent, which we're part of North America, if you did not know that. Let's continue. Let's continue reading. By 1845, California was the last large colonial outpost still owned by Mexico. Outpost is a military camp. Pioneers from the eastern United States who had settled there didn't want to give up their U.S. citizenship, and many urged or pushed the United States to annex or take over California at that time. So at that time, many U.S. citizens thought the United States had the right to own all the land from the Atlantic Ocean in the east all the way to the Pacific Ocean in the west. Conflicts or fights between the United States and Mexico grew, and war with Mexico over the California territory seemed unavoidable. So when you annex some property or territory, you are basically going and saying, I'm taking over this land as my own. And so that's kind of what the United States did with Texas already. So there was already a big strife or a big conflict with Mexico and the United States over Texas at that time. So now that the United States wanted to take over California, the tension grew between the United States and Mexico even more, especially since Mexico had just taken over California from Spain. Okay, let's continue reading. On May 13, 1846, the United States declared war on Mexico. Though the Mexican-American War lasted almost 2 years, the United States occupation of California during this time largely was uncontested. Now, occupation means that they were present or there during that time. So that means that settlers were still in California, even though they were not Mexican citizens. They occupied or they lived there despite the fact that it was not United States territory. When the war ended on February 2nd, 1848, just days after James Marshall found gold in California, the United States had won. California officially belonged to the United States. So, if you look at the map, there is a caption underneath. It says, in 1860, this was the map of the Mexican-American War. It kind of gives you a little bit of information about where some of the battles were and where they were as far as the United States goes. If you look down below, you will see a timeline. And in that timeline, our first date is in 1821. In 1821, Mexico overthrows Spain's colonial government and becomes a republic. Now, a republic at that time was almost like your own country. They basically took over and made their own government and started to prepare themselves to become a country. In the 1840s, groups of pioneers from the eastern United States travel west, some settling in California. So these pioneers were travelers looking for a place to settle as settlers. Let's go to the next date. May 13th, 1846, the United States declares war on Mexico, beginning the Mexican-American War. And last, February 2nd, 1848, the United States wins the Mexican-American War. So the Mexican-American War was against Mexico, and it was fought because of the fact that the United States wanted California as part of their territory so that we could grow across the continent, in this case the North American continent, and we would own land from all the way from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean at that point in time. Not soon after this, we actually started the Civil War. So, for troops, that would have been very difficult to have had to have fought a war at that time against another country, but then turn around and also had to have fought a war a couple years later after that within their own country. Because remember, in the Civil War, you had the North fighting against the South for slavery reasons. So we're going to take a listen to a couple of videos, and then once we finish our videos, then we will talk about what your assignment is.
The American West conjures images of adventure, lawlessness, and opportunity. But what possessed us to go west in the first place? It all traces back to an important but not very well-known conflict in the mid-19th century called the Mexican-American. In the 1840s, America was a pretty young country, and it was hungry to expand. President James K. Polk was especially eager to acquire more territory. He believed in manifest destiny. That's the idea that the United States had its duty to expand westward across the North American continent. There was a lot of incentive for American settlers to go west. They could spread religion, strike rich in business, or just get a fresh start. Needless to say, America's neighbor, Mexico, wasn't thrilled about the westward expansion craze. Both countries were already on thin ice. Mexico was bitter about losing Texas to the U.S. after it won its independence in 1836. President Polk wanted California and New Mexico too, and he offered Mexico $30 million to purchase them. But they refused to sell. Hang on, conquering the West was America's manifest destiny, right? So Polk wouldn't take no for an answer. He picked a fight, sending troops to occupy a disputed area of the Texas and Mexico border. And when American troops and the Mexican cavalry clashed, Polk seized the opportunity to declare war on May 13, 1846. Ultimately, Mexico was unprepared for war. Its internal politics were just a mess, and its cavalry couldn't measure up against the expertise of the U.S. military. After 2 years of fighting, Mexico was defeated. And in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, it ceded a third of its territory to the U.S. Areas that include modern-day California, Nevada, Arizona, and Texas. The Mexican-American War had a major impact because it resulted in one of the largest territorial expansions in the United States. It also launched the careers of a few generals you may have heard of. Future U.S. President Zachary Taylor and Civil War titans Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant.
The war had begun in April 1846 over disputed territory along the border between Mexico and Texas, now a state of the American Union. But underlying the conflict was the determination of newly elected President James Polk to push the American border all the way to the Pacific coast.
Americans were already looking towards the future and towards trade with Asia. And so there was this belief that we needed to expand, keep pushing that western boundary.
Polk had first offered to purchase New Mexico and California for $25 million. But now, as the U.S. Army marched west, it easily took New Mexico. California was next. In Los Angeles and San Diego, the Californios put up stiff resistance. In the north, Monterrey fell without a single shot being fired. The Mexican-American War lasted nearly 2 years. With Mexico's surrender in February 1848, the United States doubled in size, adding to its territory a full half of what had once been Mexico.
The enormous wealth that came to the United States, the silver that came out of Nevada. Arizona became the center of copper in the United States. New Mexico supplied a huge portion of America's wool. All of this was Mexican territory seized by the United States as a result of winning the Mexican-American War.
80,000 Mexicans were given the choice to become American citizens under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo.
The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo provided certain rights and protections for the newly made American citizens of Mexican descent. That included protection of their land rights, for example. They were to be treated as citizens, entitled to the right to vote.
Americans and Mexicans will now be one and the same people, the military governor of California, Richard Mason, declared. Subject to the same laws, enjoying the same rights and privileges. They should become a band of brothers.
All right, now that you've had a chance to listen and watch the videos that talk about the United States taking over the area now known as New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and California, now we're going to go into Schoology, into your social studies folder, and answer the questions that are the comprehension questions that are part of the assignment. I hope you've enjoyed learning about how California has really impacted how and why the United States wanted to grow and expand. Again, this is also known as westward expansion. So later on in your history books, possibly in 5th grade and even in middle school and high school, you might remember or see this again at some point. A little more detail with dates, but it's just an idea of how we became part of the United States along with California. So, have a great Wednesday afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and don't forget to go into Schoology and answer your comprehension questions. Bye.